What if I told you you were tricked, deceived, and lied to by a stage full of players, like actors, creating a great theatrical performance of a reality that never really existed? This story is what I call the grand deception. The grand deception is your perception of what you think life actually is, and makes up the entirety of what we see as human history. But it's all a lie. It never really happened, at least not in the way we've seen it. The world as it actually is in many senses what we would consider to be the illusion. The world of the supernatural, the world of fairy tales, the world of the extraordinary. That world we barely interact with on a day-to-day basis. Even those of us that do still barely scratch the surface of the extraordinariness of how things actually exist. Because of that, we stay in a kind of small circle, participating in a collective theatrical act, a kind of story of what life actually is. All of this is based on a principal lie that exists deep within our systems. This lie is something we take on from the very first minute of our experience in what we would see as physical reality. It's important to understand the power of what a lie can actually do. In order to do that, you have to understand first what a lie actually is. The dictionary would define a lie as a false assertion conceived and expressed to another individual in an attempt to deceive them. But I'm going to offer you my definition of what a lie actually is. A lie is the truth. Just stay with me here because it makes perfect sense. The perfect example that I would use is a joke. A boy walks into a barber shop. The barber looks over at his customer and says, "Hey, watch this. I'm going to show you the dumbest kid you've ever seen before. Hey kid, come here." The barber takes out a folded dollar bill and 2 shiny quarters. He lays it out in front of the young boy and says, "Hey kid, do you want this $1 or these 2 quarters? You decide." The kid looks over with bright eyes. He immediately grabs the 2 quarters and walks out of the store. The barber looks over at his customer and says, "See, what did I tell you? Dumbest kid in the world." A little bit later, the customer is leaving the barber shop and he notices the kid leaving an ice cream parlor across the street. He looks over at the kid and says, "Hey kid, come here." So the kid walks over, licking his ice cream cone. The customer asks him, "Why didn't you take the $1?" The kid looks up from his ice cream cone and says, "If I did that, the game would be over." I tell this joke for 2 reasons. One, it reveals the power of perception that people have in physical reality. Depends from what side you're looking at things from. Things can look very different. But that shouldn't exist if we're all living in the same reality. The other reason I tell it is because a joke represents the truth that a lie expresses. Truth doesn't necessarily need to be factual in order to be true, but does contain elements of facts that do exist in our reality. There is such a thing as a barbershop. There is such a thing as a man and a boy. There is such a thing as ice cream. All these things are real facts that do exist in our world, but they don't necessarily have to represent a real story that actually played out in order to reveal the truth of how people see things differently. That truth is true. The way a lie works is exactly the same way, but opposite. What it does is reveal the truth that people believe is fact. And the way it does that is by utilizing facts that exist in the outside world to reinforce itself so that you can only see things the way you see them from one perspective. In a sense, you could say that when you turn on the news at night and you see all the negative things that are happening, well, that's just the facts of reality. And yes, it is the facts, but those facts are being used by particular people to paint a picture of humanity that is very focused on one particular thing. That, in a sense, is actually a lie. So as long as the lie utilizes facts, it makes itself the truth. It tells a truth that represents a perspective on how we view physical reality, but isn't necessarily the whole picture, thus making it a lie. Even though it tells the truth of how to look at the facts, it's not actually incorporating all of them in the most balanced perspective. That happens because of the very first lie we take on when we're born into this experience. The lie that we call fear. Fear itself is the very definition of lie. Fear can be defined as false evidence appearing real. I would say a lot of the time fear actually uses real evidence to support its own expression of a distortion of love. That distortion is what we think we're seeing as physical reality, which is real, but only from a twisted perspective that we have become accustomed to living. There's another story I think illustrates this picture very clearly. The story begins with the man who has been wandering in the wilderness for many, many years. After the time that he has spent by himself in that wilderness, he has become hungry and exhausted, trying to survive by himself. As chance would have it, one day, he finds his way to a village. As he approached the outskirts of the village, the leader of the village approached him. The man asked him if he could join his village. The leader looks at him and says, "Yes, I only make one condition." A number of the people in his village had been infected by a disease a long time ago. Because of that, they make a kind of medicine that everybody needs to take. The medicine keeps death away. And so because of the seriousness of the leader's claim, the man agreed. He wasn't about to throw away his only meal and shelter just for the sake of not wanting to take this mysterious medicine. And so he agreed and began to live amongst the people in this village. After a few years, he started to notice his health had waned. He hadn't seen any kind of health decline in the years that he had been living in the wilderness. He was never really well fed or slept, but he was never ill during those times. As his health began to wane, he began to realize that he too had contracted the illness. And because he did, he told the leader one day that he felt it was inappropriate for him to burden the village with one more death. And he said that he would take himself back out into the wilderness to save them from his end. The leader asked him to reconsider, but in the end, the man's gratitude overwhelmed his desire to stay put. And so he gathered up his few belongings and made his way back out into the wilderness. After some time, this man started to realize that the symptoms of his illness started to fade, until after a year or two, he realized that they had disappeared entirely. The further and further away he got from the village, and the longer he spent out in that wilderness, he began to notice that his body had completely healed. He was still not fed very well, and he was still exhausted living out there, but being away from the medicine had actually cured him of that disease. The point of this story is that the medicine was actually the cause of the illness that was killing them. This is a story that reflects the power of the lie that we are living in reality. That lie has the power to twist things into their exact opposite. In our story, fear is that medicine. As long as we are afraid, we protect ourselves from what we're afraid of, which usually is something worse than the fear itself. Thus then, fear keeps us safe. As long as fear keeps us safe, whatever interferes with fear now becomes unsafe. Thus, love is unsafe because love is not fear. As long as love is unsafe, then love is a negative, because love is an uncontrollable variable. You can't predict spontaneity. You can't plan for it. It has to operate based on where things go organically. And this is the difference between what I call the organic world and the official world, because the official world is what we live in every single day. It's what we pay taxes to. It's what we punch our clocks at work for. How we get food from the grocery stores. Everything about the way we set up the world is what we all generally agree upon as the consensus reality or the official world. But it's a grand deception because it is only a backwards and polarized representation of the organic world that we are all living in and are highly disconnected from. Now, if you understand that, you can understand the power that a lie has. A lie has the ability to turn good into evil and evil into good. And that, currently speaking, is where we stand. You've been deceived, like everybody else around you, into living this grand deception that you see as everyday life. It's not the whole story. I want you to conceive of this for a second. Your wildest dream, your happiest happiness, is something that you can live very practically right now, right in this moment. If you can believe in a blindfold without actually having the physical experience of living it, that you now have what you need to start to look for it right now. Because the trick is very simple. The lie convinces you on a moment-to-moment basis that you can't actually live in that experience right now, but you're actually surrounded by it all around you, all day, every single day, no matter where you are, what you're doing. The only difference is in your perception of it. The world and the life that you're living in, the life that contains the ideas of stress, misery, unhappiness, hard work, or pain, is all part of the grand deception. It's all part of the lie. Not to say the facts of it don't exist, but your experience of it is at such a ground down, rudimentary level, you have no idea of the joy you're missing out on a moment-to-moment basis. If you could begin to look moment to moment to moment on the things that make you happy, even down to your own thoughts. If you feel upset or unhappy about any one thing, it's just a simple trick of a switch. The trick has switched you in the wrong direction, and all you have to do is switch it right back. No matter what the thought is, if it is something that you find unhappy, no matter how real it is, it's actually part of the grand deception. That grand deception empowers a negative experience you don't actually have to live on a moment-to-moment basis. None of the negative experiences that used to occupy your way of living can hold resonance with you any longer. They drop out of your system and you start to rise into greater and greater degrees of excited happiness in all kinds of ways that you never, even right now, would have thought that you can physically experience. This is the actual, authentic reality. All you have to do is stop believing in the principle fear. You just have to stop reinforcing it in your own life experience. And what starts to happen is you start to open to the kind of magic that you used to experience as a child in your day-to-day experience. The child that would never accept what the parents told them they needed to experience in their reality. You no longer need to listen to that kind of parentage because it's not the real reality. The real reality is your extraordinary dream come true, and it exists all around you right now because that is the house for your higher self. That's the house for the translation of more of your spirit in physical reality. That's how it works. Right now, you usually let just about this little much of yourself out. And most of your life is a lot of hard work for just a little bit of pleasure. But in fact, that's because fear is in charge. What you really want to do is start believing first that this is true without actually having the physical proof that you can actually live that for real. You need to believe it first and then act in manners that reinforce that belief. Once you believe that into your physical choices and decisions day by day by day, you will start to rearrange and reconfigure your life experience in a way that opens you to a greater source of ecstasy, love, joy, happiness, and thus health, and thus success, and thus opportunities for more and more of that experience in your day-to-day life. You will start to see changes like you've never seen before because you start to accept the reality that you've been convinced from birth is actually just a fairy tale or some kind of fantasy. But it isn't, because that is actually what has the resource to create the fantasy of what I call the grand deception. And that grand deception, even in the listening of these words, is starting to crumble underneath you right now. It is an illusion. It is smoke and mirrors. It's nothing more than a deception. That's how it has power over you. As long as it convinces you of a false reality being true, you live it. But as long as you can recognize it's a lie and it doesn't actually exist, then you can start to see the reality of the extraordinary things you're not paying attention to in your life experience. When you start to open up, you'll start to notice things that you never saw before, as if they suddenly popped out of nowhere. And they didn't. It's just that you're starting to open a little bit more and pay attention to things you never knew that you had access to all around you. This is how you begin to collapse that grand deception and reveal the impossible and extraordinary excitement of how you're now going to live your extraordinary experience from this day forward. My name is Summer Wynn. If you like these videos, please like and subscribe, share, and comment down below whether or not you started to see through the grand deception. Have a great day, guys.